In the deepest archives of human space, where quantum encryption keeps the most dangerous secrets locked away from prying eyes, there exists a single file marked with crimson warnings in 17 different languages. The file contains just 4 words that have never been spoken aloud in the halls of the Galactic Council: "The Lost Fleet returns." For 3 centuries, the galaxy has known peace under the careful watch of the Terran Federation. Humanity, once considered a barbaric upstart species, had become the mediators, the peacekeepers, the ones who built bridges between warring civilizations. They were loved for their compassion, respected for their wisdom, and trusted for their restraint. But the galaxy forgot something crucial about humans. They forgot that before Earth became the diplomatic heart of known space, it was a world that had clawed its way from tribal warfare to stellar civilization through 10,000 years of conflict. They forgot that humanity's greatest strength wasn't their technology or their numbers, it was their memory. And they forgot that there are some lines that, once crossed, can never be uncrossed. Today, that line was crossed when a human child named Sarah Chen drew her last breath on a medical station orbiting Kepler 442b, her small body broken by weapons that should never have been fired, her death broadcast across 10,000 worlds as a regrettable accident in a minor territorial dispute. The aliens who pulled the trigger thought they were sending a message to humanity about knowing their place in the new galactic order. They had no idea what message they had just sent. In the darkness between stars, something ancient began to stir. Ships that had been sleeping for centuries suddenly came alive, their crews awakening from stasis with ice in their veins and murder in their hearts. The Lost Fleet, humanity's darkest secret, their ultimate contingency, the thing they prayed they would never need, began its silent journey home. The galaxy was about to remember why Earth's children had conquered the stars in the first place. And why, sometimes, the most dangerous monsters are the ones who spent 300 years learning to be kind. The silence in the Terran Federation Council chambers was the kind that comes before earthquakes. Ambassador Elena Vesquez stood at the central podium, her hands steady despite the tremor that wanted to claim them, watching as the holographic display showed the last moments of medical station harmony in brutal, clinical detail. 12-year-old Sarah Chen had been on a school trip. A simple educational visit to see how interspecies medical cooperation worked at one of the galaxy's most advanced facilities. She had been standing next to the observation window in the pediatric ward, her dark eyes wide with wonder as she watched Zephyrian surgeons perform a delicate procedure on a young Altarian patient, when the first plasma bolt punched through the station's hull. The footage was crystal clear. The attacking ships bore the silver and crimson markings of the hegemony of Kresh, a militant faction that had been growing bolder in recent months, testing boundaries, pushing against the Federation's influence in the Outer Rim territories. They had claimed the medical station was harboring strategic assets and demanded immediate surrender. Station Commander Torres had tried to explain that Harmony was a purely civilian facility, protected under 17 different galactic treaties. The Kresh had responded with weapons fire. Sarah had been helping a vegan child reach a toy that had fallen under a bed when the second blast tore through the ward. The security footage showed her small form shielding the alien child with her own body as debris rained down around them. When the rescue teams found her 3 hours later, after the Kresh ships had retreated into hyperspace, the vegan child was alive and unharmed. Sarah was not. Elena forced herself to watch the recording to its end, even as her throat constricted and her vision blurred. Around the circular chamber, representatives from 47 different species sat in stunned silence. The Altarians' crystalline features reflected the holographic light like fractured starlight. The Zephyrians had lowered their wing membranes in a traditional gesture of mourning. Even the normally stoic Centaurian delegation had their heads bowed. But it was the empty seats that drew Elena's attention. The Human Supremacy Coalition had withdrawn from Federation space decades ago, declaring that humanity had grown soft and weak under alien influence. They had vanished beyond the void nebulae, their ultimate fate unknown. The Federation had been content to let them go, believing that humanity's future lay in cooperation, not domination. Elena wondered, not for the first time, if they had made the right choice. "The investigation is ongoing," she said finally, her voice carrying clearly through the chamber's acoustic enhancement system. However, initial evidence suggests this was a coordinated attack, not a case of mistaken identity as the hegemony claims. She gestured, and the hologram shifted to show tactical analysis data. The Kresh ships waited until the station's shields were cycling for maintenance, information that could only have come from someone with access to Federation scheduling databases. They targeted the medical and educational sectors specifically, avoiding the administrative sections where our response protocols would have been triggered more quickly. Councillor Vexhai of the Eltarian Assembly rose from his seat, his tall form shimmering with emotional phosphorescence. You are suggesting this was deliberate? That they intentionally targeted non-combatants? I am stating facts, Councillor, Elena replied. Sarah Chen was murdered. 23 other civilians died in this attack. The hegemony of Kresh has been testing our responses for months, seeing how far they can push before we push back. And how do you propose we respond? The question came from Councillor Thektar of the Centaurian Collective, her mandibles clicking with agitation. The Kresh hegemony controls 17 star systems and commands a fleet of over 3,000 vessels. They are not some minor pirate clan to be brushed aside. Elena felt something cold settle in her chest. She had been born on Luna Colony, raised in the sterile corridors of humanity's first off-world city, educated in the finest diplomatic academies the Federation could offer. She had spent her entire adult life building bridges, finding common ground, seeking peaceful solutions to conflicts that had seemed insurmountable. But, as she stood there, looking at the faces of beings who spoke of military calculations and political responses while a child's body grew cold in a morgue on Kepler station, she felt something ancestral stirring in her blood. There are protocols, she said carefully. When Federation citizens are killed in unprovoked attacks, particularly when children are involved, there are escalation procedures. The chamber erupted in a cacophony of alien voices. The translators worked overtime, but Elena caught fragments, concerns about proportional response, debates over jurisdiction, questions about legal precedents. The same diplomatic dance they always performed, as if Sarah Chen could be negotiated back to life. Elena raised her hand for silence, and, gradually, the chamber quieted. When she spoke again, her voice carried a weight that made several representatives shift uncomfortably in their seats. I have been authorized by the Terran Federation Security Council to activate Article 12 of the Defense Compact, she announced. The silence that followed was absolute. Article 12 was theoretical, a legal framework that had never been invoked, dealing with existential threats to Federation member species. Most of the representatives had probably never even read it. Ambassador, Councillor Vexhai said slowly, with respect, the loss of life at Harmony Station, while tragic, hardly constitutes an existential threat to humanity. Elena smiled, and something in that expression made the Eltarian take a step back. Counselor, I don't think you understand. The death of Sarah Chen wasn't just an attack on a child. It was an attack on the idea that human children are safe in this galaxy. It was a message that our protections are meaningless, our treaties are paper, our very existence is subject to the whims of those who see us as weak. She turned to address the full assembly, her voice carrying the formal cadences of diplomatic protocol but underlined with something much older and infinitely more dangerous. The hegemony of Kresh has declared war on human children. They have chosen to test whether humanity has forgotten how to respond to existential threats. Article 12 grants the Federation the right to take any and all measures necessary to ensure the survival and security of our species. The holographic display shifted again, showing a sector map of Federation space. Red indicators began appearing at strategic points, military installations, defensive platforms, the locations of rapid response fleets. As of this moment, Elena continued, all Terran Federation naval assets are being upgraded to Alert Status 1. Emergency powers have been invoked. And a message is being sent through classified channels to interested parties. What interested parties? Demanded Councillor Thektar. What are you not telling us, Ambassador? Elena paused, considering her words carefully. The truth was that even she didn't know the full extent of what had been set in motion. There were things in humanity's past that the Federation didn't like to discuss, contingencies that had been prepared in darker times and filed away in the hope they would never be needed. 3 centuries ago, when humanity first reached for the stars, we were not the diplomatic, cooperative species you know today, she said finally. We were younger then. Angrier. We built certain insurance policies, in case the galaxy proved less welcoming than we hoped. The chamber had grown so quiet that Elena could hear the subtle hum of the environmental systems, the distant whisper of air recyclers, the soft electronic pulse of translation equipment. Those insurance policies still exist, she continued. And, as of 37 minutes ago, they have been activated. High above the Federation capital world of New Geneva, in a communication array that most civilians believed was used for weather monitoring, a tight beam transmission was already racing toward the edge of known space. The message it carried was simple, consisting of just 4 words in humanity's oldest surviving language: the children need us. In the darkness between galaxies, something that had been sleeping for 300 years began to wake up. Elena looked out at the assembled representatives, these beings who had grown comfortable with humanity's peaceful nature, who had forgotten that wolves could learn to be shepherds without forgetting how to hunt. The hegemony of Kresh wanted to send a message, she said softly. Now we're going to send one back. The Altarian counselor was trembling now, his phosphorescent patterns flickering between confusion and fear. What have you done? Elena's smile was the kind that her ancestors had worn when they climbed down from the trees and decided that running from predators was no longer an option. I've reminded the galaxy why Earth's children inherited the stars, she said. And why some mistakes can never be undone. In the deepest vaults beneath the Federation capital, automated systems were already beginning to unseal files that had been marked with warnings in languages that predated humanity's first contact with alien life. Personnel with clearances that technically didn't exist were being quietly activated. Orders were being cut for operations that had no official names. And, somewhere in the space between stars, ships that had been built for a war that never came were beginning their long journey home. The galaxy had just received its first lesson in why humanity had never needed to be conquered. Because they had already conquered themselves. And, sometimes, the most dangerous predators are the ones who have spent centuries learning to be civilized. Admiral Marcus Chen, no relation to the dead girl, though the name burned in his chest like acid, had been dreaming of his daughter when the awakening protocols kicked in. In his dream, little Emma had been 5 years old again, running through the apple orchards of their family farm on Kepler 236c, her laughter echoing across fields that had been reduced to radioactive glass 3 centuries ago during the siege of the outer colonies. The transition from stasis to consciousness was supposed to be gradual, designed to minimize neural shock and preserve cognitive function. But Marcus had been in the dark for so long that even the gentle emergence cycle felt like being struck by lightning. His nervous system flared to life with a cascade of sensation: cold metal against his skin, the taste of recycling air, the soft amber glow of emergency lighting painting shadows across the hibernation bay. He was aware, peripherally, that similar scenes were playing out across the vast ship around him. 300,000 souls awakening from their long sleep, their bodies remembering how to breathe and move and think. The lost fleet had been dormant for so long that most of the galaxy had forgotten it ever existed. That had been the point. Marcus forced himself to sit up slowly, his muscles protesting 3 centuries of disuse despite the preservation technology. The biomechanical systems that had maintained his body during the long dark were already withdrawing, retracting their monitoring filaments and feeding tubes with practiced efficiency. He had trained for this awakening 1,000 times in simulation, but nothing could prepare someone for the reality of losing 300 years in the space between heartbeats. Status report, he said, his voice barely a whisper in the vast chamber. The neural implant at the base of his skull flickered to life, connecting him instantly to the ship's consciousness. The data flooded his mind in an overwhelming torrent. Stellar position, ship integrity, crew awakening statistics, tactical assessments, and, underlying it all, the message that had triggered their activation. Marcus read the transmission 3 times before the full weight of it settled on him like a physical blow. A human child had been murdered. Not just killed in the crossfire of some larger conflict, not lost to accident or misfortune, but deliberately targeted and murdered by aliens who wanted to send a message to humanity about their place in the galactic order. For 300 years, the lost fleet had waited in the void between galaxies, their crews in stasis, their ships powered down to minimal signatures, hoping that they would never be needed. They had been humanity's final insurance policy, the answer to a question that the Federation had prayed would never be asked: what happens when diplomacy fails and the children are no longer safe? Marcus stood carefully, his balance still uncertain, and walked to the nearest viewport. The sight that greeted him would have broken the sanity of most beings in the galaxy. Stretching out into the darkness was a fleet that dwarfed anything in recorded history. 15,000 ships of every class and configuration, from massive dreadnoughts the size of small moons to sleek destroyers built for speed and stealth. They hung in perfect formation against the cosmic backdrop, their hulls dark and silent, waiting. These were not the elegant white vessels of the Federation Navy, built for exploration and peacekeeping. These ships were black as the void between stars, their armor scarred by battles that had ended before most current civilizations had achieved spaceflight. They bore names like Retribution, Vengeance, Unforgiving Dawn, and Suffer No Evil, names from humanity's darker past, when survival had depended not on diplomacy but on the absolute certainty that attacking humanity carried a price too terrible to contemplate. Captain on deck. The voice belonged to Commander Sarah Torres. The irony of the name was not lost on Marcus, who had been his executive officer when they had departed Earth 3 centuries ago. She looked exactly as she had when they entered stasis, thanks to the preservation systems, but her eyes carried the weight of the years they had lost. Sarah, Marcus acknowledged, returning her salute. Around them, the rest of the command crew was emerging from their hibernation pods, moving with the careful precision of soldiers who had trained for this moment their entire lives. "What's our status?" "Full fleet awakening is proceeding according to protocol," Torres reported, her voice crisp and professional. "Estimated time to complete crew revival is 6 hours. All ships are reporting green status across the board. The preservation systems performed flawlessly. We haven't lost a single vessel or crew member during the dormancy period." Marcus nodded, though part of him wondered if they would be better served by having lost everything to time. The galaxy they were awakening to was not the one they had left behind. Humanity had found peace, built alliances, become the diplomatic heart of an interstellar community. They had achieved everything the Federation had dreamed of when they had first reached for the stars. And now the lost fleet was awake, carrying with them the memories and methods of humanity's darker age. "What do we know about current galactic politics?" Marcus asked as they walked toward the bridge. The corridors of the flagship Absolute Zero stretched out ahead of them, their walls lined with the names and faces of every human colony that had been lost to alien aggression during the species wars 3 centuries ago. The lost fleet had been built in the aftermath of those conflicts, when humanity had decided that they would never again be caught unprepared for the galaxy's cruelties. "Data downloads are ongoing," Torres replied, consulting a tablet that materialized in her hand at her gesture. "The Federation has grown significantly. They now encompass over 200 star systems and maintain diplomatic relations with 47 different species. Humanity appears to be well regarded as mediators and peacekeepers." Marcus felt a bitter smile cross his lips. Peacekeepers. And yet here we are. They entered the bridge through massive blast doors that had been designed to withstand direct hits from antimatter torpedoes. The command center of the Absolute Zero was a cathedral of war, its walls lined with tactical displays and weapons control systems that could coordinate the destruction of entire solar systems. At the center of it all was the Admiral's chair, its metal surface still warm from the preservation systems. Marcus settled into the command seat, feeling the weight of centuries pressing down on him. Around the bridge, his senior staff took their positions with practiced efficiency. These were not the bright-eyed cadets who served aboard Federation vessels. These were veterans of humanity's bloodiest conflicts, officers who had been chosen for this mission not because of their diplomatic skills but because they understood that sometimes peace could only be preserved through the absolute certainty of devastating retaliation. "Communications," Marcus ordered. "Give me a channel to all ships." The main screen flickered to life, showing a grid of command centers across the fleet. Admirals, captains, and commanders looked back at him, men and women who had given up their lives in the present to serve as guardians for humanity's future. They had all been volunteers, each one knowing that awakening would mean that something had gone terribly wrong with the peaceful galaxy their sacrifice was meant to protect. "Ladies and gentlemen," Marcus began, his voice carrying across 15,000 ships and 300,000 awakening souls, "we are active again because a 12-year-old girl named Sarah Chen was murdered by aliens who believed that human children were acceptable casualties in their political games." The silence that greeted his words was absolute, but Marcus could see the change rippling across the faces on his screen. He had seen that expression before, during the darkest days of the species wars. It was the look of humans who had been reminded why their ancestors had climbed to the top of Earth's food chain and stayed there. Current Federation protocols call for diplomatic responses, economic sanctions, and proportional military action, Marcus continued. These are good protocols. They are civilized protocols. They reflect the best aspects of what humanity has become over the past 3 centuries. He paused, letting the words settle before delivering the hammer blow. However, we were not awakened to be civilized. We were awakened to be effective. The hegemony of Kresh has declared war on human children, and they are about to discover the difference. Admiral Catherine Shaw of the dreadnought Righteous Fury spoke first, her silver hair gleaming under the bridge lights. Marcus remembered her from the Battle of Proxima 7, where she had held the line against a Thraxian fleet 3 times her size. What are our orders, Admiral? Marcus looked out at these weapons of war disguised as human beings, these guardians who had slept in the dark for 3 centuries waiting for this moment, and felt something cold and implacable settle in his chest. We are going to remind the galaxy of something they seem to have forgotten, he said. Humanity did not evolve to be prey. We are not a species that accepts the murder of our children as an unfortunate cost of doing business. For 300 years, we have been the peace-loving neighbors everyone could count on for mediation and compromise. The tactical display lit up, showing the current positions of Federation forces, hegemony territories, and the calculated position of the Lost Fleet relative to known galactic civilization. Starting now, Marcus continued, we are going to be something else entirely. Something the galaxy hasn't seen since our ancestors first looked up at the stars and decided they belonged to us. He gestured to the communications officer, who opened channels to Federation command frequencies that the Lost Fleet wasn't supposed to know about. Send a message to Ambassador Vasquez at Federation headquarters. Tell her the insurance policy is active and requests permission to proceed with terminal sanction protocols. Terminal sanction. The words hung in the air like a death sentence. Around the bridge, officers who had spent centuries in stasis began preparing for operations that had no names in any civilized language. And, Admiral, Commander Torres said quietly, what if the Federation denies permission? Marcus looked out at the vast fleet surrounding them, these ships built in humanity's darkest hour and preserved against an even darker possibility. He thought of Sarah Chen, 12 years old and trying to help an alien child when the walls came down around her. He thought of his own daughter, dead for 3 centuries but still 5 years old in his dreams, still running through orchards that would never bloom again. Then, we remind them that the Lost Fleet doesn't ask permission, he said softly. We take responsibility. In the depths of the flagship, weapon systems that had been dormant for 3 centuries began to wake up, their targeting computers calculating firing solutions for threats that hadn't existed when they went to sleep. The Lost Fleet had been humanity's final contingency, the answer to a simple question: what if everyone else forgot why Earth's children deserved to inherit the stars? Now they were about to provide that answer. And the galaxy was going to learn why some species were meant to be apex predators. The awakening was complete. The hunters were stirring. And, somewhere in hegemony space, beings who thought they understood humanity were about to discover their fatal mistake. Ambassador Elena Vasquez stood in her private office, staring out at the rings of New Geneva as they caught the light of the system's twin suns. The communication from the Lost Fleet had arrived 17 minutes ago, delivered through channels that officially didn't exist by an artificial intelligence that had no name in any Federation database. Terminal sanction protocols. She had heard the phrase exactly once before, during a classified briefing 20 years ago when she had first been granted Level 7 security clearance. The briefing officer had been an elderly man named Peterson who had served during the species wars, and he had spoken of terminal sanction the way ancient humans might have spoken of nuclear winter, as something so terrible that its very existence was meant to prevent the conditions that would require its use. The Lost Fleet doesn't ask permission, she whispered to herself, recalling Peterson's exact words. They take responsibility. Her secure terminal chimed softly, indicating an incoming communication from Federation Security Command. Elena composed herself and accepted the connection, watching as the holographic projection of Admiral Harrison materialized in her office. The head of Federation Naval Operations looked like he had aged a decade in the past few hours. Ambassador, Harrison said without preamble, I need to know exactly what you've done. My entire command structure is reporting anomalous signals from dead space, sensor ghosts that shouldn't exist, and communication intercepts that reference operations that have no classification level. Elena sank into her chair, feeling the weight of 3 centuries of human history pressing down on her shoulders.
Admiral, how much do you know about the contingencies that were put in place after the species wars? Harrison's expression grew grim. More than I'd like to.
I know that certain assets were positioned outside normal command structures. I know that activation codes exist for operations that no one talks about. And, I know that until today, I prayed I'd never need to learn any more than that.
The Lost Fleet is real, Admiral. They've been dormant for 300 years, waiting in the space between galaxies. When I invoked Article 12, I triggered their activation protocols.
The silence that followed stretched for nearly 30 seconds. Admiral Harrison was a career military officer who had commanded fleets in 3 different conflicts, but Elena could see the color draining from his face as the implications sank in. "How many ships?" he asked finally.
15,000.
Harrison actually staggered backward, his image flickering as the holographic projectors struggled to maintain coherence.
15,000 ships? Elena, the entire Federation Navy has 800 vessels.
The hegemony of Kresh has 3,000. Where the hell did we hide 15,000 ships for 3 centuries? Elena accessed her classified files, her fingers trembling slightly as she entered security codes that she had hoped never to use. The historical records materialized in the air between them: ship construction logs, personnel records, resource allocation data from humanity's darkest period. After the massacre at Centauri Prime, when the Thraxian Empire killed every human colonist down to the infants in their nurseries, the Federation made a decision, she explained.
They would never again allow humanity to be caught unprepared for genocide. The data streams showed the massive industrial effort that had followed the species wars. While the public had been told that humanity was building a peaceful fleet for exploration and diplomacy, the truth was that parallel construction had been occurring in hidden shipyards beyond the galactic rim. The Lost Fleet had been assembled using resources that officially didn't exist, crewed by volunteers who were willing to sacrifice their lives in the present to serve as guardians for humanity's future. They were our insurance policy, Elena continued. The final answer to a simple question: what happens if diplomacy fails and our children are no longer safe?
Admiral Harrison studied the data with the practiced eye of a military strategist, and Elena could see him running calculations in his head. These ship specifications.
Elena, these aren't exploration vessels. These are weapons of war.
Some of these designs are theoretical antimatter lance arrays, quantum singularity generators, temporal displacement weapons. The Lost Fleet was never meant to police the galaxy, Elena said quietly. They were meant to end threats to humanity so completely that no one would ever make the same mistake twice. Her terminal chimed again, indicating another incoming communication. Elena's blood went cold when she saw the source identifier: direct transmission from beyond the galactic rim, using quantum entanglement protocols that shouldn't exist. Admiral Chen requesting permission to address Federation Command, announced the AI voice that handled secure communications. Elena looked at Admiral Harrison, seeing her own apprehension reflected in his expression. Together, they accepted the connection, watching as the holographic display expanded to accommodate a 3-way conference. The man who appeared before them was tall and lean, his hair silver white and his face marked by the kind of lines that came from making decisions that kept others alive. He wore a black uniform that Elena didn't recognize, decorated with service ribbons from conflicts that predated the Federation itself. But it was his eyes that made her shiver. They held the flat, patient certainty of a predator that had been sleeping and was now fully awake.
Ambassador Vasquez, Admiral Chen said, his voice carrying the formal cadences of military protocol. Admiral Harrison.
I am Marcus Chen, commanding the First Fleet of the Lost Armada.
I am requesting permission to proceed with terminal sanction protocols against the hegemony of Kresh. Admiral Harrison found his voice first.
Admiral Chen, I'm not sure I have the authority to grant such permission. The weapons systems your ships are carrying, some of these technologies are restricted under galactic treaty. Marcus Chen's smile was winter cold. Admiral, with respect, the Lost Fleet exists outside the structure of galactic treaties. We were never signatories to the Galactic Accords, the species protection protocols, or any of the other documents that govern civilized warfare. We were built to end threats to humanity when civilized warfare proves insufficient.
Elena felt her mouth go dry. Admiral Chen, what exactly are you proposing?
The display shifted, showing a tactical overview of hegemony space. Red indicators marked military installations, shipyards, government centers, and population hubs across 17 star systems. Elena realized with growing horror that she was looking at a complete battle plan for the systematic destruction of an entire civilization.
The hegemony of Kresh has declared war on human children, Chen explained, his tone as calm as if he were discussing weather patterns.
They have demonstrated that they view the murder of our young as an acceptable cost of their political ambitions. Terminal sanction protocols call for the complete elimination of the threat and the establishment of sufficient deterrent effect to prevent similar actions by other hostile entities.
You're talking about genocide, Admiral Harrison said, his voice hoarse with shock.
No, Chen replied immediately. Genocide implies the indiscriminate killing of a people based on their species or culture. What I am proposing is the targeted elimination of a government, military structure, and supporting infrastructure that has demonstrated hostile intent toward human children. Elena studied the tactical display more carefully, noting the precision of the targeting data. Military bases, government installations, weapons research facilities, the Lost Fleet had identified every component of hegemony military power with surgical precision.
What about civilians? She asked. Chen's expression softened slightly. Civilian populations will be given 72 hours to evacuate targeted areas. We are not monsters, Ambassador. We are simply very, very good at our job. Admiral Harrison was still staring at the fleet composition data. Admiral Chen, even if I wanted to approve this operation, the political ramifications would be catastrophic.
The other galactic powers will see this as humanity reverting to its aggressive past.
Everything we've built over 3 centuries could collapse.
For the first time since the conversation began, Marcus Chen's professional facade cracked slightly, revealing something much more dangerous underneath.
Admiral Harrison, he said quietly, do you have children?
Yes.
2 daughters. How old?
8 and 12.
Chen nodded slowly.
Sarah Chen was 12 years old when the hegemony of Kresh decided to murder her. She was helping an alien child reach a toy when the walls came down. Her last act was to shield that child with her own body. The tactical display shifted again, showing the footage from Medical Station Harmony. Elena had seen it before, but, watching it now, with the knowledge of what the Lost Fleet represented, made her stomach turn. Your daughters, Chen continued, are safe tonight because 300 years ago, humans like me gave up everything to ensure that someone would always be watching in the dark.
We have slept for 3 centuries, waiting and hoping that we would never be needed. But, the moment humanity's children are no longer safe, our purpose becomes absolute.
He gestured to something off-screen, and Elena realized that he wasn't alone on his bridge. She could see other figures in the background, officers who carried themselves with the same deadly competence as their commander.
The Lost Fleet is not requesting permission to act, Ambassador. We are informing you that we will act.
The only question is whether the Federation chooses to coordinate with us or distance themselves from what comes next.
Elena felt the weight of history pressing down on her.
In a few hours, she would need to stand before the Galactic Council and explain how humanity intended to respond to the murder of a child. She could offer them diplomatic solutions, economic sanctions, measured military responses, all the tools of civilized society. Or she could tell them that humanity had just remembered why Earth's children had conquered the stars in the first place.
Admiral Chen, she said carefully, if I were to approve terminal sanction protocols, how would you proceed?
The tactical display shifted one final time, showing the current position of the Lost Fleet relative to hegemony space. Elena realized with a chill that they were already moving, their massive vessels accelerating toward their targets with the inexorable certainty of an avalanche. The hegemony has 72 hours from the time of this communication to surrender the individuals responsible for Sarah Chen's murder and to pay reparations to her family, Chen explained.
If they comply, we will withdraw and the matter will be considered closed. And if they don't comply? Marcus Chen's smile was the kind that had once made Earth's apex predators reconsider their position on the food chain. Then, the galaxy will remember that humanity didn't become peacekeepers because we were weak, he said.
We became peacekeepers because we were very, very good at the alternative. The transmission ended, leaving Elena and Admiral Harrison staring at empty air where one of history's most dangerous men had been standing. Around them, the peaceful capital of New Geneva continued its daily routine, its citizens unaware that their species had just crossed a threshold from which there might be no return. Elena looked out at the stars and wondered if Sarah Chen, wherever she was now, would approve of what was about to be done in her name. In the darkness between stars, 15,000 ships of war continued their silent approach toward a civilization that had made the fatal mistake of thinking that humanity had forgotten how to be monsters. They were about to learn otherwise. Hedgemarch Krelfax of the Kresh Dominion was enjoying his morning meal when the first reports began filtering in. The traditional breakfast of his people consisted of live prey, small creatures whose fear hormones enhanced the nutritional value and provided what Kresh philosophers called emotional sustenance. It was a practice that had horrified many species when first contact was established, but Krelfax had always taken pride in his people's unwillingness to compromise their nature for alien sensibilities. He was savoring the terror-sweetened meat when his aide, Commander Veshkar, burst into the private dining chamber without requesting permission to enter. Such a breach of protocol would normally result in severe punishment, but the expression on Veshkar's scarred features made Krelfax set down his feeding implements and focus his attention. Hedgemarch, Veshkar said, his voice tight with barely controlled panic, we have received a communication from the humans.
Krelfax felt his feeding tentacles curl with amusement.
The Soft-Skin Federation had been remarkably quiet since the incident at the medical station. He had expected protests, diplomatic notes, perhaps even economic sanctions. The Kresh military had prepared contingencies for a proportional response, a few border skirmishes, some strategic raids, nothing that would threaten the Dominion's expanding influence in the Outer Rim. Let me guess, Krelfax said, his translator rendering his words in Federation standard. They demand reparations, an apology, and the prosecution of our commanders under some obscure treaty provision.
How predictable. Veshkar's silence stretched uncomfortably long.
When he finally spoke, his words carried the weight of absolute certainty and absolute dread. Hedgemarch, they have demanded that we surrender the individuals responsible for the death of the human child and pay reparations to her family.
They have given us 72 hours to comply. Krelfax laughed, a sound like breaking glass that his people used to express derision. 72 hours? How generous of them. And what happens if we refuse this presumptuous ultimatum? Do they threaten to send more mediators? Perhaps a strongly worded resolution from the Galactic Council?
Veshkar activated a holographic projector, filling the dining chamber with tactical data that made Krelfax's laughter die in his throat. The display showed sensor readings from the Dominion's early warning network, gravitational anomalies detected at the edge of Kresh space, and energy signatures that their scientists couldn't identify.
Hedgemarch, our deep space monitors have detected a fleet moving toward our territory.
Initial estimates suggest approximately 15,000 vessels, many of them significantly larger than anything in Federation service. Krelfax stood slowly, his forearms spreading to their full span as he processed the impossible data. The entire Federation Navy consisted of fewer than 1,000 ships. The Galactic Council's combined peacekeeping forces numbered perhaps 3,000 vessels.
Where could humanity have assembled a fleet of such magnitude without anyone noticing? Are you certain of these readings? He demanded.
We have confirmed the data through 7 different sensor networks, Veshkar replied. The fleet appears to be using stealth technology that is decades ahead of anything we believe the humans possessed. Our intelligence indicates that they have been hidden beyond the galactic rim for an extended period. The Hedgemarch moved to the chamber's primary tactical display, his claws clicking against the control surface as he called up detailed scans of the approaching force. What he saw there challenged everything he thought he knew about human military capability. The ships that appeared in the display were unlike anything in Federation service. Where human vessels were typically white and elegant, designed for exploration and peaceful contact, these ships were black as the void between stars. Their hulls were scarred and angular, built for war rather than diplomacy. Many carried weapon signatures that didn't match any technology in Kresh databases.
Have you identified any of these vessel classes? Krelfax asked. Negative, Hedgemarch.
These ships do not appear in any intelligence files. It is as if they were built in complete secrecy and have remained hidden until now.
Krelfax felt something cold settling in his stomach.
The Kresh Dominion had risen to power through careful calculation and strategic aggression. They had studied every major galactic power, mapped their capabilities, identified their weaknesses. The humans had been categorized as technologically advanced but militarily passive, a species that preferred negotiation to conflict. This fleet suggested that their intelligence had been fundamentally flawed. "What do we know about their command structure?" he asked. Veshkar consulted his datapad, his expression growing increasingly grim.
"The lead vessel has identified itself as the Absolute Zero under command of Admiral Marcus Chen.
We have no records of this officer in Federation databases. The communication protocols they are using appear to be military rather than diplomatic."
"Chen," Krelfax mused.
"The same surname as the dead child.
A relative seeking revenge?" "Unknown, Hedgemarch."
What concerns our analysts is the nature of their ultimatum. This is not a diplomatic protest or a request for negotiation. They have made specific demands with a specific timeline, and the implication is clear: compliance or consequences.
Krelfax accessed his own intelligence files, searching for any information about hidden human military capabilities.
What he found was fragmentary rumors from the species wars about human contingency fleets, references in captured documents to insurance policies, speculation about resources that had been allocated to classified projects. But nothing that suggested the scale of what was approaching Kresh space.
"Summon the War Council," he ordered.
"I want our best strategists analyzing this situation. And contact Intelligence Division. I want to know everything they can discover about this Admiral Chen and his fleet." As Veshkar hurried away to carry out his orders, Krelfax remained at the tactical display, studying the sensor readings with growing unease. The approaching fleet was maintaining perfect formation, their ships arranged in patterns that suggested both discipline and terrible purpose. They were not racing toward Kresh space in the manner of an angry mob seeking vengeance. They were advancing with the methodical certainty of an execution squad. Within the hour, the War Council had assembled in the Dominion's primary command center. The circular chamber was filled with Kresh military leadership, officers who had commanded successful campaigns against 4 different species, strategists who had planned the expansion that had brought 17 star systems under Dominion control.
General Thakvar, the Dominion's premier military mind, spoke first. "Hedgemarch, I have reviewed the sensor data extensively.
This human fleet represents a threat magnitude that we have never encountered. Their ship classes appear to be purpose-built for warfare on a scale that exceeds anything in recorded history."
"Surely you exaggerate," protested Admiral Zexai of the 3rd Assault Fleet. "The humans are traitors and mediators.
They lack the military culture necessary for sustained aggression." General Thekvar activated the chamber's primary display, showing detailed scans of the lead human vessels. "Admiral, observe the weapon configurations on their Dreadnought-class ships.
These are not defensive systems or exploration tools.
I count at least 40 separate weapons batteries on each vessel, including energy projectors that exceed our theoretical maximums for mobile platforms."
The chamber fell silent as the implications sank in.
The Kresh Dominion's own dreadnoughts carried 12 primary weapon systems and were considered the most heavily armed vessels in known space. "There is more," General Thekvar continued. "Our deep space sensors have detected energy signatures that suggest exotic weaponry, antimatter projectors, gravitational manipulation systems, technologies that we believed were still theoretical."
Hedgemarch Krelfax felt his confidence wavering for the first time since ascending to leadership of the Dominion. How did human intelligence prevent us from detecting this fleet during its construction?
"That is the most troubling aspect of this situation," replied Intelligence Director Mextol, her usually composed demeanor showing cracks of uncertainty.
"Our analysis suggests that this fleet was not recently constructed.
The quantum signatures indicate that these ships have been in existence for centuries, hidden beyond the galactic rim."
"Centuries?" Krelfax's feeding tentacles coiled with agitation. "You are suggesting that the humans have maintained a secret fleet for centuries without anyone detecting it?"
"The evidence supports that conclusion. These vessels appear to have been built during or immediately after the species wars, then positioned in dormant status outside normal space lanes. Their recent activation correlates directly with the incident at the medical station.
Admiral HFY was studying the tactical projections with the practiced eye of a combat veteran.
HFY, even if we grant that this fleet exists and possesses the capabilities our sensors suggest, surely the humans would not risk galactic war over the death of a single child.
The political consequences would be catastrophic for their federation.
It was Director Mextol who answered, her voice carrying the weight of terrible realization.
Admiral, I do not believe this fleet represents the Federation. Our intelligence on human political structures suggests that this force operates outside normal command hierarchies. They may not be concerned with political consequences.
The chamber erupted in debate, voices raised in disbelief, anger, and growing concern. Krelfax watched his officers, beings who had never known defeat, who had built their careers on the certainty of Kresh military superiority, grapple with the possibility that they had fundamentally misunderstood their opponents. "Silence," he commanded, his voice cutting through the noise like a blade.
"What are our options?" General Thekvar consulted his strategic assessments.
"We could attempt to negotiate, offering limited concessions while avoiding full compliance with their demands.
We could mobilize the full Dominion fleet and attempt to meet them in open battle.
Or we could comply with their ultimatum completely."
"And your recommendation?"
The general's scarred features reflected the gravity of their situation. "HFY, based on the force projections I am seeing, a direct military confrontation would result in the destruction of the Dominion fleet and, possibly, the devastation of our core systems."
"These humans have not come to negotiate.
They have come to demonstrate the consequences of threatening their children."
Krelfax felt something that his people rarely experienced: genuine fear.
Not the pleasant terror of prey that enhanced their meals, but the cold certainty that they had miscalculated so severely that survival itself was in question.
"How much time do we have?" he asked.
47 hours, HFY. The human fleet will reach the outer boundaries of Dominion space in 47 hours. Krelfax looked around at his war council, these officers who had conquered systems and subjugated civilizations, and saw his own growing dread reflected in their expressions. They had awakened something ancient and terrible, something that had been sleeping in the dark between stars, waiting for exactly this moment. "Prepare all communication channels," he ordered finally.
"I will speak directly with this Admiral Chen. Perhaps we can reach an understanding before." He trailed off, unable to voice what might come next.
In the tactical display, 15,000 ships of war continued their inexorable advance toward Kresh space, their black hulls cutting through the void like harbingers of humanity's long-suppressed wrath. The Dominion had 47 hours to decide whether they would face judgment or annihilation.
And, in the darkness between stars, Admiral Marcus Chen was counting down the hours until the galaxy remembered why Earth's children had inherited the stars.
The communication came through quantum entanglement channels at hour 46 of the ultimatum, with just 2 hours remaining before the Lost Fleet would reach the outer boundaries of Kresh space. Admiral Marcus Chen received it in the war room of the Absolute Zero, where he had been conducting final tactical briefings with his fleet commanders. The holographic projection of HFY Krelfax materialized in the center of the chamber, flanked by what appeared to be his entire war council. Chen noted the barely controlled fear in their body language, the way their feeding tentacles curled defensively, the subtle tremors that their translators couldn't quite hide from their voices. "Admiral Chen," Krelfax began, his words carrying the formal cadences of diplomatic protocol, "I am speaking on behalf of the Kresh Dominion to request negotiation regarding your recent ultimatum."
Chen studied the alien leader with the patient attention of a predator evaluating prey.
3 centuries of stasis hadn't dulled his ability to read his opponents, and what he saw in Krelfax's posture told him everything he needed to know about the Dominion's current state of mind. "HFY," Chen replied, his voice carrying no warmth whatsoever, "you have 1 hour and 57 minutes remaining to comply with our demands.
Are you prepared to surrender the individuals responsible for Sarah Chen's murder?" Krelfax's image flickered slightly as the transmission adjusted for the growing interference from the Lost Fleet's approach.
"Admiral, surely we can reach some accommodation that serves both our interests. The incident at the medical station was regrettable, but it was a tactical decision made during a legitimate military operation.
The silence that followed lasted exactly 30 seconds.
Chen had counted them off internally, allowing the weight of the Hedgemarch's words to settle throughout the war room. Around him, his officers maintained perfect military discipline, but he could feel their controlled fury like heat radiating from a furnace. Hedgemarch, Chen said finally, you have just confirmed that the murder of a 12-year-old human child was a deliberate tactical decision. You have admitted to the intentional targeting of non-combatants in a medical facility. You have, in short, confessed to the exact crimes for which we seek justice.
Admiral, I believe there may be some cultural misunderstanding. No.
Chen's voice cut through the transmission like a blade.
There is no misunderstanding.
You ordered the death of Sarah Chen to send a message to humanity about our place in your expanding empire. That message was received.
Now we are sending one in return.
Chen gestured to his tactical officer, who began transmitting fleet positioning data to the Kresh leadership. The holographic display filled with the real-time positions of 15,000 ships, arranged in attack formations that had been perfected during humanity's darkest conflicts. You now have visual confirmation of our fleet disposition, Chen continued. As you can see, we are not here to negotiate, trade concessions, or engage in the diplomatic theater that has characterized galactic conflict for the past 3 centuries.
Hedgemarch Krelfax was studying the tactical data with growing horror.
Admiral, surely the Federation would not approve of such massive retaliation for a single death, however tragic. The political ramifications, the Federation didn't send us, Chen interrupted. We are not bound by their treaties, their diplomatic protocols, or their restraint.
We are the answer to a question that your people should have considered before pulling the trigger. What happens when you threaten humanity's children?
Admiral Catherine Shaw stepped forward, her silver hair gleaming under the war room's harsh lighting.
Hedgemarch, my name is Admiral Shaw.
I commanded ships during the Proxima Siege, the Battle of Centauri Prime, and the liberation of the outer colonies. I have seen what happens when species underestimate humanity's capacity for violence. Her smile was winter cold.
You are about to receive a practical demonstration.
Chen could see the Kresh War Council exchanging desperate communications in their clicking, guttural language. Their translators were working overtime, but the panic in their voices needed no interpretation.
Admiral Chen, Krelfax said, his composure finally cracking, what you are proposing is genocide. The galactic community will never accept the wholesale destruction of an entire civilization.
We are not proposing genocide, Chen replied with the same calm precision he might use to discuss weather patterns. We are proposing the complete elimination of the military and political infrastructure that authorized the murder of a human child. Your civilian populations have been given 72 hours to evacuate targeted areas. The tactical display shifted, showing detailed strike plans for every major Kresh installation. Military bases, government centers, weapons research facilities, shipyards, every component of Dominion power had been identified and marked for destruction. Your species will survive this encounter, Chen continued.
Your government will not.
Your military will not.
Your ability to threaten human children will not. You cannot simply destroy an entire civilization because of one incident.
Krelfax's voice carried the desperation of someone watching their world collapse in real time. Chen felt something ancient and implacable settle in his chest, the accumulated weight of 3 centuries in stasis and every human child who had died while he slept. When he spoke again, his words carried the authority of 10,000 years of human evolution. Hedgemarch, your people study prey species to understand their fear responses. You savor their terror because it enhances your feeding experience. You have built a culture around the consumption of helpless beings. The war room had grown absolutely silent. Even the ship's environmental systems seemed to have quieted, as if the universe itself was holding its breath. What you have failed to understand, Chen continued, is that humanity is not a prey species. We are apex predators who learned to cooperate. We are monsters who chose to be civilized. For 3 centuries, we have been the galaxy's peacekeepers because we believed that violence was a last resort. The holographic display shifted one final time, showing the approaching Lost Fleet in all its terrible glory. 15,000 ships of war, their black hulls scarred by conflicts that predated most current civilizations, their weapon signatures painting death across the void. You have just demonstrated that violence is sometimes the only resort, Chen said.
The Lost Fleet exists because there are beings in this galaxy who believe that human children are acceptable casualties. We are here to correct that belief. Hedgemarch Krelfax made one final attempt at negotiation. Admiral, I am prepared to offer reparations. Full compensation to the child's family. Prosecution of the officers involved. We can reach an agreement. You have 53 minutes to surrender the individuals responsible for Sarah Chen's death, Chen interrupted. If they are not delivered to us by the time our fleet reaches the edge of your space, we will come collect them ourselves. And, if we comply? If we meet your demands completely?
Chen's smile was the expression that humanity's ancestors had worn when they first picked up tools and decided that running from predators was no longer necessary. If you comply, we will withdraw to our position beyond the galactic rim and return to stasis, he said. The Lost Fleet will sleep for another 3 centuries, waiting and hoping that we are never needed again.
And if we do not comply?
The transmission began to break up as the Lost Fleet's approach generated massive gravitational distortions.
Chen's final words came through clearly despite the interference. Then, the galaxy will learn why Earth's children inherited the stars, he said.
And why some mistakes can never be forgiven.
The holographic projection cut out, leaving the war room of the Absolute Zero in perfect silence.
Around Chen, his officers maintained their positions with the disciplined stillness of weapons waiting to be fired.
Fleet status? Chen asked quietly.
All ships report ready, replied his tactical officer. Weapons systems are charged, targeting solutions are locked, and evacuation monitoring indicates that civilian areas are clearing according to schedule.
Chen nodded, settling back into his command chair.
Through the main viewports, he could see the lights of Kresh space growing brighter as they approached. Somewhere ahead of them, in bunkers and command centers across 17 star systems, alien leaders were making the choice that would determine whether their civilization would survive the next few hours. Communications, open a channel to all ships, Chun ordered. The tactical display lit up with the faces of his fleet commanders, men and women who had sacrificed their lives in the present to serve as guardians for humanity's future. They looked back at him with the patient certainty of predators who had finally found their prey. Ladies and gentlemen, Chen began, in 47 minutes, we will either witness the surrender of those responsible for Sarah Chen's murder, or we will demonstrate why humanity became the galaxy's apex predator species. He paused, thinking of a 12-year-old girl who had died trying to protect an alien child, whose last act had been one of selfless courage in the face of senseless violence. For 3 centuries, we have been the monsters who chose to be civilized, he continued. Today, if necessary, we will be the monsters who remembered why they were feared. The countdown continued, marking the seconds until the Lost Fleet would reach the boundary of Kresh space. Behind them, in the war rooms and communication centers of the Federation, diplomats and politicians watched in horror as humanity's true nature was revealed to a galaxy that had forgotten why Earth's children had conquered the stars. Ahead of them, in the bunkers and command centers of the Kresh Dominion, alien leaders faced the terrible choice between justice and annihilation. And, in the void between stars, 15,000 ships of war continued their inexorable advance toward a reckoning that had been 3 centuries in the making. The galaxy was about to remember that peace was not humanity's natural state. It was a choice they made every day. And, sometimes, when that choice was taken away from them, they reverted to what they had always been underneath the veneer of civilization. They became the species that had climbed to the top of Earth's food chain and decided that the stars belonged to them too. The Lost Fleet was coming home. And the children of Earth would be safe.